Tradition. To non-Catholics, this term is just an excuse to justify anything the Catholic Church does that isn't explicitly in Scripture. Prayer through Mary? Tradition. The Mass? Tradition. But is this really the case? The word tradition comes from the Latin word tradere, which means to hand over. For Catholics, when we use the word tradition, we are referring to everything that the Catholic Church passes on to the next generation. For Protestants, I think a lot of the pushback from the word tradition is because of our modern understanding with the word. It has some sort of optional connotation, like you have your Christmas traditions and I have mine. You open all of your gifts on Christmas Eve, I open all of mine on Christmas Day. So it doesn't really matter because it's your tradition and my tradition and it's kind of personal preference. And so when Catholics use the word tradition, it doesn't really hit home for Protestants because they think that it's just an optional personal preference thing when that's not really what the word means. I think if you're a Protestant and you're watching this and you're genuinely trying to understand, if I were you, I would replace the word tradition in your mind with the word oral teaching. Because as I'm going to explain a little bit later, that makes much more sense and it's really more accurate to what Catholics mean when they use the word tradition. According to the Catechism, through tradition, the Church in her doctrine, life, and worship perpetuates and transmits to every generation all that she herself is, all that she believes. The Pope, the bishops, and the faithful are called the organs of tradition, or they're the means by which tradition is passed on. The magisterium, or the teaching order of the Church, which is the Pope united with the bishops, has the role of guaranteeing the authenticity, interpretation, and transmission of the entire tradition of the Church. And as the faithful, it is our job to take that, what we are given, and pass it on to our children. While there are lots of different types of tradition, there are two main categories. Those things that are necessary for salvation, and those things that are connected to and support what is necessary. That type of tradition that is necessary for salvation we refer to as the deposit of faith, public revelation, or divine revelation. Now, the deposit encompasses the dogmas of the Church, Christian morality, the sacraments, the hierarchy of the Church, and sacred scripture. Those things that are necessary for salvation are guaranteed to be passed on in its entirety, so the faithful will always have access to those things that are necessary for salvation. Within the deposit of faith, we usually divide it into two parts: sacred tradition, or that oral teaching, and sacred scripture, or the Bible. Now, during the first generation, the deposit of faith was only transmitted orally, i.e. through sacred tradition. What is interesting about this is because the deposit of faith, or all those things necessary for salvation, are guaranteed to be available to every generation, and the first generation didn't even have scripture, everything that is contained in sacred scripture is already contained in sacred tradition, meaning sacred scripture is actually a product and a part of sacred tradition. That is part of the reason why the argument of sola scriptura, or scripture alone, aside from tradition, doesn't make any sense. That early church, the apostles, they didn't have scripture. They wrote scripture. What are we supposed to do about that first generation of Christians? Are we to say that they can't be saved because they didn't have scripture? That's why sacred tradition is so important, because sacred scripture came out of sacred tradition. So the deposit of faith is that type of tradition that is necessary for salvation. But there's another type of tradition that is not strictly necessary, but is connected to and supports the deposit and aids the faithful spiritual life. This is called ecclesial or ecclesiastical tradition, and I like to refer to these as small t traditions. For anyone who's curious, I'm just going to go ahead and rattle off those things that are included in ecclesiastical tradition, just so you can appreciate how vast this type of tradition is. Ecclesiastical tradition includes things like fasting laws, the date of Easter, sacred monuments, or things created by human hands or revealed through private relations, things like church documents, writings of the saints, paraliturgical rituals like the Stations of the Cross, the Rosary, chaplets, etc., sacramentals like the miraculous medal, brown scapular, St. Benedict medal, crucifix, liturgical rituals, rites, calendars, and articles, so like the rituals of the sacraments, blessings, dates of feast days, missals, vestments, chalices, and sacred art, so churches' altars, statuary, paintings, and possibly music. I haven't seen anywhere that says that sacred music is a part of tradition, but it kind of seems intuitive, so I'm going to add it in there, but just let you know, didn't hear this from anybody, but I think it deserves a spot there. Now, even though ecclesiastical tradition is not strictly necessary for salvation, much of it could be closely connected with an article of faith. So to omit or deny a part of the ecclesiastical tradition could lead you to denying a part of the deposit of faith, which are those things that are necessary for salvation. So we can't take this type of tradition lightly and just dismiss it as, oh, it's just not necessary. Tradition ultimately is not the property of us, but it's the property of Christ. And it is the church's role, it's the church's duty to preserve what they are given and pass it to the next generation. If any changes are made at all, they should be slight, gradual, and come after lots of prayer, discernment, and consideration. Development of tradition should be motivated out of a love of God and not by those pressuring the magisterium to get with the times and change the church to be more applicable to the modern world, whatever that means. I like to think of it this way. As humans, we have 3 basic needs: food, water, shelter. These are the essentials that you need to survive. If you have food, if you have water, if you have shelter, you should probably be fine. You're going to live. But I can't imagine any of us that would be happy living a life with just food, water, shelter. I mean, living life would be much easier if you had a partner to live life with, a house to live in, comfortable clothes to wear, maybe pets to play with, etc. If you're watching this video right now, you have access to another non-essential, which is the internet. And so I don't think a lot of us can imagine living life without a few of these things that support life, like a phone or a car or the internet. In the same way, the Catholic Church has access to those essentials that are necessary for salvation, the deposit, but we have so much beautiful, rich patrimony and tradition that supports the deposit and actually makes believing in the deposit that much easier. And that's one of the reasons why I just adore being Catholic. It's such a joy, and it makes your walk with Christ so much richer and more beautiful and easier, honestly. When you have writings of the saints and beautiful prayers like the Rosary there to support you and to make believing in those essentials easier and much more enjoyable. As faithful Catholics, what is our response to tradition? Well, tradition, believe it or not, isn't just some static thing, but actually requires actions from us. For example, passive tradition is the act of receiving what is handed on to us, and active tradition is the act of passing on what we have received to our children or to the next generation in general. We have a rich patrimony of those things that are handed on to us from the previous generation and thousands of years before us. And it's not just the act or the role of the magisterium, but it is also up to every mother and father to continue that tradition and to pass it on within their homes, their many churches, to their children, so that the tradition isn't just available in books and documents, but is living and active within their homes. And as always, I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comment section below if the phrase tradition or sacred tradition was ever confusing and seemed imprecise to you. I mean, it did to me, hence this video. And let me know if you have any other questions about sacred tradition. I would love to clarify those and dig deeper as well. And I want to just say thank you so much to those that have stuck around during this long period of me not uploading. I really appreciate it. I've been praying and really trying to wrestle with the future of this channel and what I want to do with it. I want it to be more, Christ-led. Not just Christ-centered, but Christ-led. I want him to show me what he wants me to make videos about. So I'm not going to put pressure on myself to upload every single week if it's not something I think that I'm convicted to do. I appreciate your patience, and I thank you so much for sticking around and for being here with me. But anyway, don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed, and don't forget to check out this video before you go. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in my next video.